Sorry, I went there. Ethan didn't. And number one is a jackhammer.
Like a construction site jackhammer? Okay.
You sit them down and you ask them to define their style, and the majority of them can't.
I was thinking about it because of the fact that I wrapped on my most recent short, which had like had like its own tone, its own story, and its own perspective. If you can find a way to nail it down and like run it down to a few parameters or ideas you should be following, what's the best way to know how your story and your perspective and your tone can be translated through cinematography? How do you tell a story with your image? For example, me and a lot of other people on like my level have that understanding of how cinematography can psychologically affect the viewer to serve the story and the tone. Like during a tense moment, you might not want to show many wide shots, for example. Like, I might want to use a longer lens when a character is in a more dreamlike experience or more detached from reality. So there's, shoot wide open. So there's a fuzzy background, that kind of thing. A lot of techniques in cinematography that have like a psychological effect on the viewer that serve the story, but on like a larger scale, how should we be shaping our style based on the story and the story we're trying to tell?
I think the short answer isn't that short.
How long is the long answer?
All I can do is give you an outline of how I approach it.
Mm-hmm.
So do keep in mind that my way is just what has developed and what has makes sense to me now, where I am in my creative and artistic development.
Yes.
For me, it is tied into philosophy and in two parts. How do I see the medium of motion picture imaging, and how do I see story?
Okay.
So how I see the medium is, so for me, the medium is magic. And no, unfortunately, I'm not talking like Harry Potter magic. If only. I see it more like stage illusion type of magic, like your Penn and
Right.
Teller and those kind of magic shows. You ever been to a show like that?
I saw one on Sunrise when I was 7 years old. That news show, the breakfast one. I remember like walking around, like marching around the house afterwards, pointing out like why it was fake, and I was like really mad about it. So that's my experience with
Yeah, can you imagine going to one?
yes.
Going to something like a Penn and Teller magic show,
Mm.
would you go into it 100% convinced that what you were being shown is going to be 100% reality, no fakery, no illusion?
No.
No. So I believe that in those types of shows, there is an unwritten contract between the magician and the audience.
Mm.
And the contract goes somewhat along the lines of I, the magician, is going to fool you, the audience. You, the audience, is going to enjoy and marvel at this illusion up until the point that you, the viewer, can tell that this is an illusion.
Mm.
If that happens, contract is broken, the deal is off.
Mm.
Compare that to narrative filmmaking. Is there not a similar contract?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think that
Dune.
there's a less
Sorry, I went there. Ethan didn't
trigger
go.
word. Sorry,
I
do
actually,
continue. Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
So
So,
sleeper agent activation
Dune.
just then.
Did
Do
you
go
go
on.
into Dune knowing that you were going to see reality, real life from planet Arrakis?
No, yeah, no.
No.
I wish.
But we still walk away from movies like that kind of going, oh, that didn't feel real. Even though we intellectually know that this is all fakery, it's an illusion.
I think that the impressive part of that is how much it convinces you that it's real. Like that's why people freak out about Dune because it felt
And,
so
and, and,
real and so
and
tangible.
also, and also, how little does it take to break the illusion?
Mm. Not much at
And
all.
how
Like really
once
minor
the
things.
illusion is broken, it really is like you've broken a contract, isn't it?
It's hard to get back into it.
Yeah,
I think
exactly. Right?
I have a friend who's very, very very critical of like most movies that he watches. And I remember I watched It a while back. He liked the movie, but he hasn't spoken very kindly of it because there's a scene in like the first act where it's they've got the camera on a jib or something, and then it's just an establishing shot moving into the town, and the camera shakes like a little bit, like a tad, like it might have bumped something maybe, and that screwed him up so badly that he couldn't watch the rest of the movie. Like he
Hmm.
was not enjoying it because of that. It was
Yep.
like he has like an ultra sensitive suspension of disbelief, and
Hmm.
because the camera bumped something lightly in the first act, his experience was damaged from then on.
Yep. One of the parts that form the core of how I approach a new project, a new
Mm,
story, is I'm going to make you believe.
gotcha.
And I'm going to use every tool in my arsenal.
Mm,
Once I've made you believe, once I've kind of pulled you into the world, the reality, so to speak, of the story, my next intention is I want to move you.
An
That's
emotional
how
response
I
of something.
understand the medium of motion picture. Motion
Mm,
picture, moving
emotion.
pictures, pictures that move
Mm,
you, emotion pictures.
mm.
So I think there was. I'm gonna have to dig deep for this one. I'm not sure I can actually. There was a filmmaker on Instagram who termed it very well. He kind of terms it as thinking in cinematography. As
Mm.
in, he just had a graphic with a question like, "Do you think in cinematography?" I'm going, "Oh, yeah,
Oh,
that's what it is." And from that, I've kind of developed what I think of as my move you tools.
yes, I've seen these before. I'm aware of the moveyoutools. They're very cool. Mm.
Again, parameters. Things
Finally,
that
we're
I
at parameters,
can
guys.
control and manipulate to
Mm.
hopefully move you.
It's very, very nice that we can kind of. The best thing about the medium, I think, is that we can talk philosophical stuff, but because it's also an inherently technical medium, there's a it's like a strange connection between all the philosophical elements of the art form and like technical parameters, because people are animals who can be manipulated by images.
Right. I have introduced my move you tools in teaching. Revisiting, do you remember how many move you tools do I have and what
Oh
are they? So
man.
you have alluded to one of them. You were speaking in the introduction to this little part of the episode about how do you use composition, different lenses to tell a story, to shape a moment. When you choose your lenses, when you choose your composition, your staging, what are you changing?
The way I see it, you're kind of changing obviously there's a bunch of things you're changing, but for me personally, the immediate effect is changing the subject's relationship with their environment that
Uh
kind
huh.
of
Yeah.
assists perspective. So I shot a music video where we used very, very long lenses in CUs and MCUs, and it generated this, extremely fuzzy background and low depth, like a shallow depth of field that created a dreamlike appearance to the whole thing, which
Okay.
was
All right.
a theme of the song and a theme of the direction the director wanted to go in. On my other short, the one we did most recently, if you use a very, very, very wide lens
Okay.
in a
I'm
close
gonna,
up.
for the moment, with the movie tools, they are not that hands on yet.
Okay, all right.
By choosing different focal lengths for different shot sizes, what are you manipulating in terms of the viewer's perception without using technical terms?
I'll just say that normally I just manipulate the character's perception. Like whatever perspective you're looking at is the character's either perception of or relationship to the world. That's the effect that
Can you think of some other ways of describing our relationship to our world?
our perspective, if you will, or our
Yeah. All right, let me put this a different way. Does the room size we're in affect our emotions?
yes, yes, indeed.
Do we feel the same way in a wide open space in the middle of nowhere as we do in a really small and particularly low ceilinged apartment block in the middle of a city?
Absolutely not. One is large and potentially intimidating, and one is very, very small and cramped.
We can literally feel being boxed in,
Like, as I was saying earlier, we're just animals. These things
right?
have an effect on us primarily.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at the psychology of caged animals.
Yeah.
So, space.
Mm.
When you choose those different focal lengths, when you want to change that perspective, is it not manipulating space?
I think
When
so.
you stage and block and choreograph, does it not happen in space?
It does.
Have you noticed if you go to someone's home, like a party or a casual meeting or whatever, how do you first enter someone's home? A, if you know them very well, you're very close, you've been friends with them and you've known them the whole your life, versus a casual acquaintance.
Me personally, I entered through the front door both times,
Uh
but I'm
huh.
happy to just kind of
You
walk into
hope
someone's
with
house if I know
permission.
them. You'd hope so. If you're a casual acquaintance, you walk in through the front door and then stay there for a little bit.
Yep.
No guide
Like
around.
one or two steps inside, and you wait kind of for some kind of indication or instruction from your
Mm,
host. Where do
mm,
we go next? Like, do we take our
yeah,
shoes off? Do we go straight to the kitchen? Do we go to the lounge room? Do we go to
yeah,
the backyard deck? Whatever. But with really close friends, it's kind of like as soon as the door flies open, you make a beeline for like, this is your seat on the lounge,
yeah.
etc., etc., etc. So we have really strong emotional connections and understandings of space, right?
Mm,
As in, I'm quite certain that if you took a random collection of people and put them in a room, in a house, within a few minutes, most people would be able to determine whose place that was. Let's say that one person was the owner of the space and you put
mm.
five random people in that space.
That's a
There is a
worthwhile social
way
experiment.
we place ourselves. There's a certain choreography that goes into that that shows us the ownership of a space.
And that's kind of what you're manipulating with your composition and your lens size,
and
I think.
and and also physically, where is the camera is kind of where is the viewer.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I like that. That's cool. That's very cool.
So that's also
I
why when we spoke about coverage, I was talking about if you're not physically moving the camera, it feels very static.
yeah.
I'm not talking about like seeing the camera moving in the shot, but literally
Oh yeah, no,
position
just like the
A,
position
position B,
changing.
like whatever.
Hmm.
If it really only stays in one place, it feels really disconnected, as if you
Hmm.
are that first time I'm entering, I don't really know you
Hmm.
kind of person. I'm waiting for you to tell me, should I sit down here? Do I need to take
Hmm.
my shoes off? Etc. Etc. Etc.
Which could actually serve the purpose of your short or your film, but
Yeah.
normally doesn't.
So, space. How do I want the space to feel?
Hmm.
And I'm not really concerned about what the space is in front of the camera. I really only think about how does the space feel. Do you know the expressions, I had such a great time, time just flew by? Or it was the most boring day ever. It just dragged on and on and on and on.
Yes. Yeah.
Is our perception of time and the passage of time, is that subjective? Sorry, objective.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. That's an important part of it. I think is that humans perceive
Time
time in
feels different depending
kind of
on
different
our
ways.
emotional state.
Yeah.
So time is an important element of
Hmm.
how I want to move the audience. What does
Hmm.
time feel like? And there's another element of time. Why do screenplays specify time of day?
I think again, this comes back to us being animals. We have a different response to daytime than we do nighttime,
Absolutely.
and a
Yeah.
different response to the rising sun than we do the setting sun.
Yeah. And also
You know,
the middle of the night. How many sayings do we have for the middle of the night?
many.
Such as
Such as
the
my camera
darkest
running out of
hour,
battery. Yeah, there it goes. That sucks.
darkest hour,
Mm,
dead of night,
mm,
witching hour, hour of the
mm.
wolf. How many of those are objective descriptions and how many of those are emotional descriptions?
All emotional descriptions. We are very scared in the middle of the night.
Uh-huh. This may not be quite as prevalent this close to the equator, but as you move away from the equator, the seasons really change our mood. Seasonal affectional
I don't know.
disorder.
Oh, right, yeah.
Weather.
But then again, are these things that the DP should be taking into consideration, or things that the director and writer should be taking into consideration? Things like
Bit
the
of both.
weather and the time.
Bit of both for the DP, particularly when it's not specified.
Gotcha.
Then you have a choice. You
Sweet.
can interpret it.
Lovely.
And then what does day look like?
Mm.
It's not only one given. So I had this student who was kind of struggling to how to emotionally translate cinematography. And we figure out for her, it was all about the weather. That really triggered her to kind of enter into the narrative.
Okay.
So when she got stuck about how do I shoot this scene, it's kind of, well, what kind of weather is it? Oh, okay. So it's rain, but not like a thick, kind of like it's more of a drizzle. And it's kind of like late in the night. And now I
And
get
then
it.
forms
Now
the
I
way it
know what
looks.
this space, time, and interesting as well. At a certain point, the two change place. How far away are you from Newcastle?
I have no clue. I have a terrible sense of direction and geography.
Or
I couldn't tell you.
right now, how far away are you from Sydney? Like CBD, Sydney.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I could tell you how far away I am time-wise. Like I'm a good hour
Exactly.
away from Sydney. Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
As in, I can sit in Sydney and say that Newcastle is 2 hours away on the train.
Hmm.
But I cannot, for the life of me, give you a kilometer figure.
No.
At a certain point, physical distance becomes so abstract that we automatically, without even thinking about it, substitute for time.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think some of the other obvious ones, color affects our mood.
Hmm. Yeah, that
How
one's
we perceive a situation. Light, and there are several aspects of light. It's kind of like the Swiss Army tool, as far as I'm concerned. You probably noticed I'm a bit of a lighting focused DP, just
Oh yeah.
tiny little bit. And there are a number of reasons for that. For me, lighting is a compositional tool, as in I use my lighting to direct the viewer's attention.
This is where we're kind of leaning into, because obviously there's no one answer to the question, how do I translate emotion and narrative into cinematography? This is where we're kind of leaning into style and the way that different styles come into play.
Lighting for me is also a huge component in how do I show time of day or season. So what do we got? We got space, time, color, light,
Lighting, yeah.
or
Space,
just
time,
light,
color.
full stop. Movement or motion, and that's kind of tied very closely to space and time, as in we cannot have movement without space and time.
Oh yeah.
But how do we portray movement?
Say you talk about camera movement, for example. That's the difference between a camera either not moving or moving on a track or a steady cam or moving
Sure.
around handheld and the
Yeah.
effect it has on the viewer.
But if I do that,
Right.
does
Okay. And
that
also,
movement look like what you see with your non-camera human vision? No, it does not. It's blurrier,
no, it is
isn't it?
not.
So that type of difference in movement gives us a different feel. And then there's a more, in some ways, less tangible and simultaneously more tangible at the same time, which is something I think of as palette and canvas.
Palette and canvas.
As in the image itself has certain inherent qualities that we respond to. And my analogy
see.
there is painting. You ever done much painting?
Not at
Watercolor,
all.
acrylics, oil?
Not really, no.
No?
Yeah, not my forte.
Can you picture in your mind's eye the difference between a watercolor painting and an oil painting?
Yeah.
Do they have the same texture?
No, they do not. One of them is rougher, one of them is smoother and lighter, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do they have the same depth and intensity of color?
No.
Those are qualities that don't change no matter how much we change the subject matter of the artwork.
Yeah.
They are inherent to the image itself.
What would you say technically is the deciding factor of canvas then? I'm thinking camera.
Sorry,
and the
in
tool.
terms of painting or in
Cinematography.
terms of
Yeah. I'm thinking tools by the sounds of it. Like, what camera are you using? What lights are you using? What are the inherent qualities of those?
these days mostly post.
Ah, okay.
Ari is starting with the Alexa 35 to make it more of a creative choice in camera. And they now have what you call textures.
Wow.
So part of that is a choice of how much grain do you let into the image, sharpness, detail, as in are you kind of suppressing the extremely fine detail just a little bit, or are you really emphasizing those, the kind of more medium level kind of detail? Are you emphasizing that, or are you pulling back a little bit on that? So this is what would be equivalent to, in the old days, the choice between different film stocks. As
And on a
in,
larger scale, these are all
the
our parameters.
physical medium has certain inherent qualities that we respond to. Because otherwise, painting would have died.
Yeah, we wouldn't have needed it if we didn't have those, like the actual physical qualities of a painting.
And if we didn't respond to them in some way, shape, or form, painting as an art form would have gone the way of the dodo.
Yeah.
The way I kind of approach it is, how do I respond on those 6 parameters?
And that informs
And then I go, all
your
right,
approach to the story.
this XYZ space, it kind of feels like a longer lens. It feels like toppy sources that are really close with a fast fall off, etc., etc., etc.
This is where a fair amount of technical knowledge also comes into play. Like once you master the technical aspects, you have a much easier approach to here's how blank looks, here's the effect I think it's going to have on the space or the time or the motion. You
Yeah,
know, all those
but
things.
I think it can also be worthwhile to ask yourself when you come across a scene that you really respond to in a movie, is just ask those questions. How does the space feel? How does the time feel? What colors are there?
Yeah.
How does the light contribute to this?
I see.
And I guess in some ways, for me, the easiest way to translate palette and canvas is that.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense.
So, for example, are you familiar with something like, let's say, Natural Born Killers, the movie? Where they're really kind of mixing and matching different formats. They were deliberately using wrong chemicals, like more experimental developing techniques to bring out different textures and palettes in the image in different scenes.
Okay, all right. But and that's kind of an extension of your film example, the whole that's the tangible qualities of the thing that's putting it to the screen.
Yeah.
We've almost gotten a straightforward. We've almost gotten a straightforward roundabout answer in like 30 minutes.
Give
It's
or
happened
take.
again.
My process is kind of emotionally let the story, my kind of initial take on the story kind of wash over me, and then see how do I respond in terms of the.
How do you respond in terms of those parameters and your technical knowledge of how it
And
affects
then
people?
I can translate those feelings into technique.
There's our answer. There's our answer in 30 minutes. We've done it. We've completed the thesis of the show.
The 6 movie tools, they're kind of covering a lot of check boxes in terms of what techniques could I possibly employ to move a viewer for this particular story, this particular moment, this particular project, this particular scene. I don't think they are necessarily the be all and end all. So if you have particular aspects of your emotional engagement with motion picture stories that you feel aren't covered by the movie tools that I have, then by all means feel free to add your own. But
I can't add any right now, but
Pardon?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think they're all quite broad in a special way. So I think anything I could add would actually apply to a number of them. All I can think of is kind of motion.
How do you think I've distilled it down to these 6?
Yeah, I'm assuming you thought of a bunch at one point and then started collating them into certain sub areas.
So for me, it's kind of like an entry point. Use it as a starting point to, rather than go technique A engenders emotion B, very often we get a spurious result from that kind of correlation and causality. Most often, what happens in my observation is technique A affects space, for example, in XYZ way, and because we're affecting space in XYZ way, we get this emotional response.
Of course, right. Okay, I got you.
So, although there may look like there is a direct connection between technique and emotional response, very often there is something in between here. So, for me, rather than looking like technique A leads to whatever emotional outcome, I'm looking for what is that thing in between.
What is it? What is it actually
and manipulate
affecting,
and shape?
and why does it affect the emotional response?
Yeah.
It's not. It's never just the technique. The viewer isn't thinking, "Oh, they're using a longer lens. It looks. I'm feeling sad." Like the viewer isn't thinking that. It's whatever the shape is affecting.
Here's a really good exercise and an example right there If you take a shot, a medium shot or a medium long shot somewhere where you don't see the ground and you shoot against a blue sky, so effectively shooting a blue screen, how much difference can you tell in focal length unless we're talking extremes?
Not much. From like a blank blue sky, not much.
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. So unless we're talking like extreme wide angle, you're not going to see the difference.
No.
Where you see the difference is how it shapes and presents the space around the character.
Mm. Mm.
People go, I'm using a long lens, but I'm not getting the same feeling of the space as XYZ movie that I tried to. That inspired my choice of techniques, shall we say.
Yeah.
Half the time, probably majority of the time, it's because the physical space is not the same.
No.
Majority of the time, the biggest difference between that movie's use of XYZ focal length and what you're not feeling that you're getting is that they used a bigger space. They used more distance.
And that's where it kind of like leaks into other departments. I think that's one of the intimidating parts about this kind of thing is that a lot of the work leaches into other departments, and everyone needs to be working in sync, and you'll find yourself thinking about things that on your job description you shouldn't actually be thinking of. Things like how big is the space? Can I get a big space for this? Like things that should technically be the production designer's job or something like that. Like it can get a bit it can get a bit overwhelming with that kind of thing, I think.
A bit political.
A little bit, like a tad, you know?
Let's do some like easy, implementable, actionable takeaways on
Right.
the aspect of space. Probably one of the easiest way to give yourself more depth and distance in your image is to actually have more depth and space in front of the camera.
I've noticed that there's a lot of cases where me and my friends have like worked in a small scale under the assumption we can make things look different. When actually that reminds me of it was the thing we talked about. It was to do with sensor size. I know it's kind of unrelated to what we're talking about now, but I promise you it is kind of related at the same time. One of the videos that I watched about sensor size a while back explained that when people talk about, say, a large format sensor size on like a more expensive camera, pieces of media that use these have a wider sense of the space. You can capture more of the space. The space appears larger, and
Because it is.
therefore a larger format creates a larger space, right? But they made a really good point. They said no, productions that can afford large format cameras can normally afford huge spaces as well, and like
Yeah.
a big set, and all of
Yeah.
these things going on around the set. The space not only feels better, but bigger, but it is bigger. It's a bit of a
Uh-huh.
double-edged sword because
Yeah.
there's an element of truth to it. A large format does capture more of the space. It doesn't make it feel larger.
To take this a step further in terms of practical takeaways,
Hmm.
flippant advice. I tell
I love flippant
directors and
videos.
producers, whatever location you have in mind, reduce it to 1/3 of that space, and that's how much space you have left to stage your actors after I've gotten in there with my crew and my equipment.
Jesus. That's a very encouraging and nice thing to say that I'm sure everyone will take very well. uh,
It's, you know,
Walking in on set and being
you,
like, well,
you like what I can produce, then this is how I produce it.
I have a bunch of
And
people.
if you
People take up
don't
all the
like
space.
how I produce it, then you need to find someone else because this is the only way I know how to produce it. That's yeah.
It's pretty valid. Yeah.
Do both of us a favor. And the next one is a hallmark in my experience of amateur staging and blocking is to have everything in a single line
The same plane.
at the same plane from the camera.
Mm. That's something I've been trying to work on that personally, but it just happens. It just happens, I'm telling you. Like it characters just end up on the same plane. It's really annoying. I there's a couple setups where I've tried to make sure that like I don't know, four characters are sitting around, and I've said to the director and the producer, should we have one of them is sitting on the ground, one of them is standing behind them a bit further back, one of them is stand like kind of kneeling on a stool or something. Very hard to pull it off perfectly, and it's also very hard to pull off in a way that's believable. because if you have four people in a conversation, unfortunately, not many of them are going to be standing in different parts of the room. Like
Why not?
wildly different parts of the room. It depends on the space you're working in, depends on the circumstances. Well, in this specific example, we were shooting in a park. They were sitting in a group of four, as friends do, and it was just hard to justify the idea that one of them might be standing up, or one of them might be sitting a few meters away from them, or one of them was leaning against the tree. It just took a very, very long time to figure out, and ended up we just didn't, basically. There's a good chance it
So,
might look weird, was our concern.
did you give them business?
Did we give the business? I can't remember. I hope we did. I think I mentioned business to the director, I think. Whether or not we
Um,
gave them business, I certainly hope we did, because otherwise it's weird.
Anecdotal story from Woody Allen's directing. He might have a
To hear.
particular
Sorry.
blocking in mind to get the actors to go where he wanted. What he would do would be to create physical obstacles that prevented them from going anywhere other than where he
Oh.
wanted. And so he goes, okay, right, here's the set. Okay, you go wherever you want. But because he'd kind of like plotted paths and obstacles, they ended up where he wanted them to go.
Hmm.
The next one, again, we're talking purely in terms of functional space, maybe not so much in terms of creative use of space yet. But there's another kind of cheap trick. What's the longest possible axis you can find in a room?
Diagonal,
So if you want
right?
more depth in your image, look for the diagonal.
Ah, okay. So shoot from slash place characters in the diagonal of the room, or along.
I'm going to reserve the right to completely contradict myself. You know how I was saying a bit earlier
Cool.
that my job is to make you believe, and I'm less concerned about what is actually in front of the camera than what you as a viewer actually perceive. Now I'm going to flip that and go, there's only so much trickery that technique can do to change your perception of that space. So I think rather than kind of jump to a different lens, rather than jump to a different sensor size, look at the space in front of you first. And the flip side of what I was saying before about whatever physical space is available in a location, director, you have 1/3 of that left to work with after I've got my mitts on it. You were saying your early filmmaking efforts, small spaces, and kind of feeling like we can always make it appear and feel bigger.
Yeah,
That
which is just
is
lying to ourselves.
exactly 180 degrees the opposite of what the reality is.
Yeah, I think
I
that
can always, I can easily make a space feel smaller, but
I
making
think
it
what you're trying to
feel
say.
larger than what it is extremely, well, I mean, within certain parameters,
I think that
it's extremely difficult.
I get the impression that you're trying to say that like while you've got this whole like the whole concept like perception is that you should be making the viewer believe in blank, make it believe it's actually on the screen, even if it goes against reality, make them kind of be fooled by something. You still actually need a certain amount of real space or a certain amount of the reality you're trying to show on screen to exist during production or to exist while you're making it in order to actually pull it off. You can't just lie about everything.
A little example, and particularly when you come to really, really small spaces, that pan bar on your tripod?
Yeah.
That's usually what, like, you're probably looking at about 40 to 50 centimeters, if not more. If your room is only 2.5 meters across, that pan bar in and of itself, on its own, is already taking up 20% of the space.
Which is not sustainable. You can't manage that very well.
So yeah, if you consider that physical space, a lot of beginners kind of mentally, subconsciously go, yeah, I can bring that camera right smack up against the wall. But if you want to operate and frame that, that's not the reality.
No.
You need a good 3 feet away from that wall to be able to frame and operate.
And that was also that's where the space also determines the appearance and every single thing about the way your movie looks, because you're desperate to have it up against the wall. Incidentally, you've ended up with a static shot.
Yeah, and that's also why, there are 2 items that I put on every equipment list that no producer has ever provided yet.
Oh, really?
And number 1 is a jackhammer.
Like a construction site jackhammer? Okay.
Because I always, without fail, I'm working on location. I just need to be 1 foot inside this wall for my elbow to be able to operate the shot.
So the producer's not providing these things to you out of like concern and like for legal reasons that you can't actually destroy the thing that you're working in,
I
potentially?
I don't know, but so far in my
I'd say so.
career, never been provided that jackhammer, which, in my
No.
opinion, should be a vital piece of the cinematographer's kit.
Hmm.
For that very reason, it is very, very practical.
Mm.
This is kind of like using space as an example of how am I taking my perception along one of my media tools and I'm putting it into practical technique.
Mm.
See, all of those examples that we've been talking about there is about how do I shape the perception of space for the viewer on screen.
I think as an extension of that, to move on to style, for example, if we're talking about these tools being used to shape the viewer's perception of the world, would you say that style is kind of the influence that the artist's perception of the world has on the way those tools are used or the way it looks? Or even just like the tendency for a cinematographer to work on a certain style of story or gravitate to a certain theme, that might inform their style and what makes it up.
I think those are certain elements of it. What I have discovered myself, because I've been there. There was a time kind of towards the end of my time at university, film school, whatever you want to call it. I'm kind of like doing that student soul searching and going like, what's my style? I should have a
Right.
style by now. How do I go about finding this style? Everyone else seems to have a style.
I don't think I have a style yet. I'm not at the end of my.
And at a certain point, what happened was I got so busy shooting and I got in so many situations on set where I had no time to think. As in, up until that point, very much of my decision making process on set was kind of,
Utilitarian?
what would Darius Konji do in this? What would
Yeah.
Janusz Kaminski do here? What would Roger Deakins do here? What would
Bit
Robert
of
Richardson
hero
do here?
worship, perhaps.
Yeah. But at a certain point, I got so busy on set with just like, you have to shoot, like whatever. Okay, you put that there and shoot. And eventually from that, what happened, people started coming back to me, I like your style, dude.
You just developed one by accident.
And I'm going like, what do you mean? I'm just like trying to get shit done. And that's when I started to realize style is a symptom. The underlying cause is how you instinctively see and perceive.
Yeah. How
So you're making
practices
technical
perceive the world.
choices because you see X, Y, Z.
Incidental style creation based on how you see. I kind of agree with the idea that it's just kind of.
And this is something that I see in a lot of the high-end cinematographers, and I see also in interviews with a lot of famous artists, etc., etc., etc. You sit them down and you ask them to define their style, and the majority of them can't.
Really? I had
Yeah,
never actually thought that would be possible.
because they react according to what they see.
Right. So they can't actually pin it down because it's just
Yeah,
existence to them.
it is
Yeah.
how they see.